I'm going to spend a bit of time here today discussing the 1987 work City on Fire, directed by Ringo Lam, starring Chow Yun-fat and Danny Lee, a tremendous action, thriller, crime work which is of an immensely high standard, especially for 1987, so much so that it is cited as having a notable influence on American directors. Most commonly cited is Tarantino, but one can also feel the likes of a Tony Scott or Michael Mann seeking to compete with this undertaking from Lam. The movie is viscerally watchable, alternately highly entertaining and mercilessly horrifying, and it would be quite easy to name it as one of the best films of the genres one would identify it with. Director Ringo Lam was responsible for really damn cool action or crime centric work during the late 80s and early 90s, which include the similarly named School on Fire, Prison on Fire, and Prison on Fire 2, but also rather enlivening pictures like Full Contact, Burning Paradise, or even the comedic, though highly kinetic and assertively filmic Aces Go Places 4. I know little of the other Aces Go Places movies. He was an exemplary action film director during his peak period, though his films do seem to feel less compelling over time following the mid 90s. He had a limited number of films during the 21st century, none of them seem to be of major interest, at least to me. They include a couple of Van Damme pictures from the early 2000s. A number of the great Hong Kong action film directors had undergone this general decline also, from John Woo to Sui Hark, Corey Ewan, Gordon Chan. I suppose it would be fair to call Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung to be film directors as well. I've never found Johnny too entirely impressive beyond his two or four most celebrated films, disappointingly. But let's now address the whole thing of City on Fire being such an obvious influence upon Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs that it makes that latter film totally irrelevant or completely unoriginal, which is a view I've seen posted online now and again. Here I sincerely don't think that the appeal of Reservoir Dogs is quite the same as that of Lam's City on Fire. Tarantino's film employs evocative dialogue, charismatic performers, minimalist grace, and bewitching application of popular recorded music in devising an immensely memorable filmic item. I've always found both films to be rather enjoyable, and I feel no performative obligation to prevent myself from admiring Reservoir Dogs. I really find them to be pretty distinct enough. It may be partly as a result of my viewing Reservoir Dogs much earlier than I had City on Fire. I was 14 viewing Dogs, maybe 19 or 20 when sitting down with City on Fire. Though even if it were reversed, clearly the Tarantino film is more about the dialogue, its players, the animating shot composition, and the shuffling of linear chronology, rather than the more energetic, motion-fixated, dramatic character development occupied and, in general, more maximalist dynamic within Lamb's City on Fire. Also, while we're on certain snobbish film dirt, I would want to briefly note how I do greatly feel that Reservoir Dogs and Tarantino's films of the 90s in general were way better than the vast majority of, especially mainstream, American films coming out at that time, and I really have no interest in scoffing at them just because some inevitably arrogant teenagers like them and aren't very familiar with, say, Melville, Goddard, Siegel, or Ringo Lam yet. And to be totally honest, I never really understood why some were sickened by Tarantino doing the very things, American genre movie pastiche and cinematic playful homaging that certain of the French auteurs did to American cinema, say Melville or Goddard, or that American figures like such as Siegel or even De Palma explored also. If what Tarantino did was unoriginal, as those directors had already done so, then so be it. Although I always felt as though Tarantino's identified priorities were solidly distinct. The fixation with dialogue, the outward charisma of the players, the lively animation of interiors, and the incorporations of recognized popular culture. However, if one were to feel revulsion at these specific things, then I guess those are one's prerogatives, and if so, then, well, so be it. I would consider Lamb's City on Fire to be one of the probably greatest from '87, the year of its release, along with the marvelous masterwork which is Raimi's Sorceress Evil Dead 2, definitely John McTiernan's legendary sci-fi action corker Predator, one of the most beloved movies presumably of all time, Kubrick's well-appreciated Nam flick, the still iconic Full Metal Jacket, Clive Barker's spellbinding horror royalty, that is Hellraiser, very obviously, the sheerly genius comedy picture Whitnale and I, one of the best scripts ever written in history. Perhaps Borman's Hope and Glory may be mentioned also. Bertolucci's The Last Emperor is a gallant undertaking and really transcends its perhaps perceived status as some banal Oscar period romp. It is a world cinema radiant triumph. Exciting gooey venture which is street trash. Alfonso Brescia's underrated, trippy sword and sorcery gem known as Iron Warrior, the anime anthology film known as Neo Tokyo, featuring segments from Rintaro, Yoshiaki Kawajiri, and Katsuhiro Otomo, the Soviet film adaptation of Isaac Asimov's novel The End of Eternity, of which this film shares the title of, the Ray Bradbury ethereal adaptation, also originating from the USSR, titled in English The Veldt, which is too underseen and entirely mesmerizing a cinematic voyage, the sci-fi animated feature directed by the utterly legendary animation wizard from France, René Laloux, this being the stellar picture titled Gandahar, for Nikos Nikolaitis' moody sci-fi journey that translates into English from Greek as Morning Patrol, which is also potentially one of the finest films ever made from any decade more generally, and the Italian sci-fi miniseries that was helmed by their B-tier yet highly assertive and skilled genre maestro, who we know as Antonio Margheriti, the work being the fascinating production known as Treasure Island in Outer Space. An incredibly strong year in cinema, and I would still willingly mention City on Fire as one of that particular year's greatest cinematic works, wholeheartedly. If you haven't yet seen this, I believe you're in for a rather riveting time. If you think you'll like it, I'm fairly confident in assuming that you absolutely will.